Not long ago, I compared 5 speakers in one video. You told your grandparents, you told your grandkids, you told your mum, your dad, everybody you knew where you was on the day you saw 5 speakers in one video. Not gonna do that again, it was a lot of work. What I'm gonna do now is 6 speakers in one video. I was pretty unimpressed with the Dali Katch G2. But to be fair, how can I've only compared it against the G1. Maybe it's still fantastic if you actually hear it against other speakers. Yeah, but the clue was, I said I've already got a reference and I know other speakers. But do you know what? Just so
I love you.
You can make your own decision. What I decided was, let's compare it against speakers that, for most of us, we will already have a handle on them. And if you haven't, well, maybe you should. These are 5 other speakers that I do listen to, that do offer value for money. And if you've got a chance of having 5 speakers on your mantelpiece, they could be options for you. So what have we got? We got the former pound-for-pound world champion, the Soundcore Motion Plus. No, I do not work for Soundcore. I just like speakers that offer value for money. That's the clue. You know, it doesn't have great bass, but it does have great clarity, and it has wide-angled tweeters, almost unique in that. What I'm saying, well, quite honestly, at this price point, absolutely unique. It's got tweeters, it's got woofers, passive radiators, but it doesn't have deep bass. We already know that. But for clarity and dispersion, it's right up there still as a contender. What else we got out? I'll tell you what else we got. We got the pound-for-pound world champion itself. We got the Soundcore Motion Boom. Just remember, it's all about value for money. We're talking like 80, 90 quid, depending on the deal you get. It could even be cheaper. I thought I heard a rattle there for a minute. I got a bit worried. Nope, there's no rattle there. We got the Soundcore Motion Boom. Don't forget, this is all about because this speaker, front-to-back configuration, with its passive radiators, tweeters, woofers, what HiFi said is one of the greatest in terms of sound per pound. And they're going to be asking 330 quid retail, about 80 quid. Let's see how it stands up against these former pound for pound, current pound for pound, a speaker I really, really like. I tried the Emberton, I tried the Kilburn, pretty unimpressed with them. But the Stockwell 2 absolutely has a place on every mantelpiece. It's a taste of high end. Look, it's not. These are Bluetooth speakers. These are not £40,000 tower speakers. For a taste of high end, but it's going to be a little bit echoey. It's got front to back configurations, just like the Dali Katch G2, and it's going to sound a little bit echoey. They called it Benlon processing. We know it as probably a bit of phase difference, a little bit of echo. It's kind of nice, but it's not going to be focused. But it's going to be a nice sound. It is a taste of high end. And to me, quite similar in setup to the G2. Something that we don't talk about much. Even I don't talk about it because I was not that impressed when I first heard the Audio Pro add-on. I don't know why is it add-on? Add-on to what? Well, I know the others, they've got a sub you can add on. Don't think you can add the sub to this. The C3. It's a portable speaker. I need true portable speakers on this channel. I've been listening to this more and more. It is monitor-like. Look, it's not got the deep bass. You can't say it's a monitor. It's got a bit of a push in the upper bass, but it still comes over as quite natural. A nice, relaxed listening. Listen, you know, we know this is bass heavy on the Motion Boom, and if that becomes a bit too much, which it can do if if it's just for a relaxed listen, this can do the job. Just know 2 tweeters does not make it stereo. I hear that a lot. 2 woofers and 2 tweeters would make it stereo, but it's got 1 woofer, 2 tweeters, and of course we got the JBL. It's got this massive, fantastic logo. It's high tech, and you turn it and it glows red, and we love it. We got so many JBL fanboys on this channel and other channels as well, because as we know, JBL sell more Bluetooth speakers than anybody else. They know what they're doing. I know that because when I got a soundbar from JBL, the marketing geezer told me they know what they're doing. I don't need a marketing speech, but they thought I did. But anyway, the JBL Charge 5 actually is not a bad speaker, not terribly overpriced. It's got a separate woofer and tweeter. The problem is it's only got 1 woofer and 1 tweeter, albeit 2 passive radiators. It ain't stereo, it's mono. So, you've probably got a reference on 1 or more of these speakers.
You said it was as bad as the soda
throne in terms of value.
Well, I did. And let's see if you agree with me. I'm going to start by having a listen to the G2 versus the JBL Charge 5.
Broken windows and a warning scribbled on my wall saying that you better turn around. Wouldn't be the first to try to burn me down. Your move, you do. Would you love me at my worst? Kill the coffins and the doors. Try to break me like a curse. You know that will never work. I'm a little bit absurd. I like dancing on the verge. Anyone can love a pretty little mansion, but could you love a haunted, haunted house? Or could you love me now? A haunted, haunted, I'm a haunted house. A haunted, haunted house. If you'll just take it out. A haunted, haunted, I'm a haunted house. Could you love a haunted, haunted house? Or could you love me now? A haunted, haunted, I'm a haunted house. A haunted, haunted house. If you're just taking out. A haunted, haunted, I'm a haunted house.
If you didn't see my first video on the Dali Katch G2 versus the Dali Katch Gen 1, you will know that it's a completely different speaker below 50% and above 50%. I can't do a million different things because I'm already comparing 6 speakers in this video. I think for most people, they're going to listen around 60-65% volume. That's normal listening. But if you only listen below 50%, no, it's going to sound a lot better because it's going to have a hell of a lot more in the deep bass. I think it's a fair test though. I can only do it at 1 volume. Of course, we're going to do the maximum volume later. But I'm also doing it in warm mode because we've already seen, if you go back and look at my original video, if you haven't seen it, that's the balanced mode. It's not the clear mode. And I'm doing the balanced mode, which is warm mode. They would have you believe otherwise. And I'm doing it around 60% because that's real world volumes. That's not massive loud volumes. To me, that's normal listening. And it seemed to be tuned for listening at, oh, can I hear it now? You know, at ridiculously low volumes. So, against the JBL Charge 5, yes, you can hear. The bass is tame and it's muted. The JBL Charge 5, it has better mid bass. It sounds deeper in the bass. It sounds fuller in the bass. It sounds better in the bass. The G2 does sound overly bright. And do you know what? As far as I'm concerned, it is overly bright. And one of the problems is, well, they obviously think it's one of the pluses. I guess for the people that they expect to pick that up, maybe it's because they think older people are going to listen. But you know what? Not all of us oldies are deaf. So there's a 2.5 kilohertz. You're particularly sensitive around 2.5 kilohertz, and that's where they decided to put their peak. If you're an old geezer and going deaf, you may think that sounds absolutely fantastic.
Nice.
You haven't gone deaf yet. If your ears are still okay, you may think, like me, it sounds a bit brittle, a bit shrieky outside of the bass. They're actually quite similar in terms of mids and the highs, except because they both have a bright nature. It's just that it's more bright or is excessively bright on the G2, and whereas it probably works for what they're trying to achieve on the JBL Charge 5, which is slightly bright compared to a flat frequency response, but not overly bright. What I can say, and I've said it before, if you're looking for pluses about this speaker, it's a big, airy, open sound. Yes, it does sound pleasantly open, and you get a nice sound stage in terms of the size, given the size of the speaker, whereas you don't get that with the JBL Charge 5. It is mono, it does sound a bit closed in, a little bit compressed, but the sound is quite nice overall. Let's have a listen versus the Audio Pro add-on C3.
Can't hold it in this time, got no filter, I got no filter, 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 no filter, I got no filter.
both have a boosted upper bass. However, I would say they get away with it on the Audio Pro C3, whereas that sounds too hard-edged and too obviously upper bass. Whereas it's kind of puff, puff, puff sound that you're going to get from the upper bass. But for me, that's a nicer presentation than the hard-edged, brittle-sounding upper bass. So there is a lack of deep bass on the C3. There is a big upper bass, but for me, it kind of works. And the overall balance is pretty nice. It is kind of monitor-like. You do get a clear window. Just know it's got 2 tweeters, but that don't make it stereo. That doesn't make it a massive soundstage. It is stereo on and you do get a left and right separation, albeit it's front to back on the G3. But it's overly bright. I have to keep saying it because it's not massive volumes, is it? 60, 65%. It's overly bright. I just think it sounds more natural. And it's a nicer listen. And do you know what? It's cheaper. It's cheaper because it's coming in at around 180 quid or 330. Oh, actually, when I checked, it was $330. I'm not sure what the Dali Katch is in dollars. I couldn't see it on Amazon, but I would imagine it's a bit more. It's either the same or less. And certainly in the UK, 300 quid versus 180 quid. And even if they're the same price, I would listen to that. Would not listen to that as a go-to pick up Enjoy speaker. Let's get real. Let's talk about the former pound for pound world champion, the G2 versus the Motion Plus.
I'm at 69, and you need relief again, 'cause I got in your head, and I'm like a drug, you won't get enough, you know that's just the way I feel, 'cause everything I've seen before won't help anymore, won't give me any satisfaction, to the moon and back, that's where I've been, I need something new, so I want you to take me to another place where I've never been before. Are you using all this space? Yeah, all I wanna say is I want you to take me to another place, to another place, to another. I want you to take me to another place, to another place, to another. I want you to, 'cause everything I've seen before won't help anymore, won't give me any satisfaction, to the moon and back, that's where I've been, I need something new, so I want you to do. I want you to take
I am pushing the upper bass on the Motion Plus, and you can hear that it's overly pushed, but you know, if you don't push the upper bass, there is no deep bass on the Motion Plus, and if you don't push the upper bass, you know, for me, I got up to like 200 hertz for me as upper bass. Technically, they would say up to maybe 300, even 400 upper bass. Above 200 hertz, I know there's a 300 hertz slider, but it doesn't balance out. You've got to use the 150 hertz slider if you want to balance out the upper bass above 150 hertz. And if you don't push the 150 hertz slider, and if you keep the 150 hertz at a natural level, everything else is recessed. So if you're going to fill out the bass, as far as I'm concerned, you do have to push the upper bass. So I have pushed it, but you know, with that tuning on this particular speaker, I have retuned it. It's sounding quite natural and quite nice. I'm really liking it. It's just a shame that it doesn't have the deep bass, but hey, you can't have everything. Certainly sounds nicer, a more natural presentation than the overly bright G2. And while it does have deep bass, this is what gets me. It can go deep. There is deep, but you don't hear it really because how it's pushed the upper bass. They could have balanced out that bass, but they didn't. Only at lower volumes does it sound nice and full. And now, although there is deep bass that you can measure, and you can kind of hear it, it's lost behind the rest of the thin, brittle sound and the upper bass push. Let's get real. Let's talk about the pound for pound world champion, the Motion Boom. An 80 quid speaker, stonking value. If you like deep bass, if you don't like deep bass, you're going to say, well, I can't even listen to it. It's terrible. So the G2 versus the Motion Boom.
Det var true love ved første blikk. Øynene sa gi meg litt drikk. Jeg måtte ha hun her, kunne ikke vente mer.
I have pushed the bass on the Motion Boom because it's all about the deep bass. So let's push it. It is overly pushed, and you may say, "Oh, well, I couldn't listen to that." Just know you can go into the custom EQ and you can set it to any level you want. The headroom's there, the EQ, the custom EQ is there, which ain't there on the G2. And in terms of sound signature, they are opposites. There's no deep bass at all at these volumes. It's all about deep bass on the Motion Boom. It's not that unbalanced. Just remember, it's quite V-shaped in this particular video, in this particular EQing. I'm just EQing it how I feel at the time. But it's all about getting the most out of the bass, because that's what this speaker is. Don't buy this if you don't want deep bass or you don't want big bass. Then get the Motion Plus. And I don't work on Soundcore. But if you listen below 50% and you listen at ridiculously low volumes, get the Dali Katch if you got 300 quid going on offer. I'm not arguing about it. But in terms of sound, it's completely different. This gives you massive deep bass at 80 quid. That gives you no deep bass, 300 quid. Which just leaves the Dali Katch G2 versus the Marshall Stockwell 2. Maybe this is the most relevant comparison because they are both front to back speakers, so-called 360, but that's not when you side on. And by the way, you probably think, well, firing that way, and it must sound nice straight. No, it doesn't work quite like that. I mean, stereo, equilateral triangle, angled in to your ears. That's what true stereo is about. It's not about, well, there's a left and there's a right and nothing else matters. So no, you don't get a nice soundstage if you listen that way on. That ain't what it's all about. You still, for my money, want to listen on axis. But it becomes a 360 degree speaker. So, again, warm mode, because that's the balance mode. I've got bass at 8. That's the EQ. So the EQ is done on the speaker itself. Let's have a listen to them compared.
Both the cigars and wear their shiny shoes. Now it's my turn to show them that I wanted to know. That I wanted to know. Where does my time even go? Where does my life go? Where does my life go? Where does my time even go? Where does my life go?
For my money, there's a nice deep rounded bass on the Stockwell 2. It's it's nicely balanced, and you can fiddle with the twiddly knobs and get a different balance if you wanted to. Just remember, I've got mine at 8 for the bass. Already they're calling it warm mode, but it's the balance mode. But there's no deep bass. I can only repeat what I said: thin, brittle, lack of deep bass. Not even particularly accurate in its presentation. And that's a nice neutral sound. However, that's more focused. That isn't. That's the problem. They've gone for headlines, and we do blumline processing, therefore buy my speaker. Well, the result of that is just sounds a bit echoey. In terms of balance, it's nice. It's a little bit more echoey than I would like, but you can find that a fun listen. You can still get a serious listen to that. But the problem is, especially with vocals, it ain't going to be focused. It will be focused a bit more on that. If you're looking for the 360 degree speaker, look at the money. But you can't pair that as a stereo pair. And you can pair that. It can pair that, but you can pay double the money when playing the same track. The Dali Katch G2 against the 5 other speakers. G2 versus the JBL Charge 5. The big difference here: that mid bass on the Charge 5 way more present. Loads more volume in that bass than on the G2. Don't forget, this is in warm mode on the G2, and still, that bass is truncated. Elsewhere, the mids and the highs, actually, it's a closer match. G2 against the Audio Pro C3. The biggest difference here is 2 kilohertz and above. We're very bright on the G2, even in warm mode. That is a push over and above, as you can see, the original track. That's a big difference between these two speakers. The amount of high end you're going to hear. There is more deep bass on G2, but there's more mid and mid-upper bass on the Audio Pro C3. G2 versus the Motion Plus. You do have to push the upper bass on the Motion Plus to make up for its lack of bass, not only in deep bass, but in the upper bass. If you're not pushing the 150 Hz slider, you're going to be lacking up to 300 Hz. And we know the Motion Plus is a bright speaker, but it's not a match for the G2. In its warm mode, it's still a brighter sounding speaker than the Motion Plus. It's particularly strong in the presence region, but overly so. It still retains a bright nature. G2 versus the Motion Boom. And it's pretty obvious the difference looking from around 130 Hz and below. We've got a massive, big, huge bass on the Motion Boom. It may be too big for you, but I wanted to EQ it so you could see exactly what the bass can do. Just no wallop. Where that peak is on the rise, we're actually on a dip on the G2. And the amount of bass on the boom may make it sound like the mids and the highs are quite drowned out, when actually, as you can see, they are there. The Stockwell doesn't go very loud. We're at 75% to match 65% on the G2. It's actually quite a close match. Two similar speakers, front to back drivers, and there are a lot of similarities in the frequency response. However, we do have more mid and deep bass on the Marshall Stockwell. It does sound fuller, noticeably fuller than the Stockwell, stronger in mids, and then they swap peaks. G2 having a peak around 2.5 kilohertz, the Stockwell around 5 kilohertz.
And now if we have a look just on the basis of how accurate are they compared to the original track.
On the Motion Boom, we do need a bit of a V shape. We're making the most of its big bass, and we're pushing that bass, and we're making up for it by pushing the highs as well. The great news is you've got a lot of headroom in the custom EQ. You can tailor it how you want. In terms of accuracy, outside of where we've actually pushed it, it's actually quite accurate. The Audio Pro C3, also pretty accurate, does have a pushed upper bass to make up for its lack of almost no deep bass, to be honest. That bass won't be to everybody's taste, but it is prominent. It does roll off a little bit after 8 kilohertz. JBL Charge 5 does have a bright nature. We can see that. It's on the rise all the way from 1 kilohertz and upwards, but it's not over the top. It just gives it a bit more clarity. You can see the upper bass and the mids where it's pushed a little bit. We have pushed it +1 in the bass. Dali Katch G2, it's just a truncated bass, although it can play deep. There's no punch, there's no peak there. So it's quite flat, as you can see, from about 120 Hz down to below 70 Hz. It's there, but it's flat. And then starts rolling off, but not so quick that you can't hear any of that deep bass. It's there, but there's no push, there's no punch to it. We can see it does rely on this upper bass push in so-called warm mode. And then very strong in the presence region. I guess that's deliberate, but for my money, it's just too bright. The Motion Plus, we've already noted, to make up for its lack of upper bass from 200 to 300 Hz, we do have a big upper bass push, but without that, you're going to be lacking above 200 Hz. Otherwise, with this tuning, it's really accurate. The Marshall Stockwell 2, perhaps actually the flattest sounding of all the speakers in this test. The problem here is it does have pseudo stereo. Although it's pretty accurate, it won't be the most accurate in presentation. There is some decent bass there. It doesn't start rolling off to about 70 Hz, and you will get some of that deeper bass.
Now, what is the ultimate headroom? How loud do they go? Do they go loud enough to wake up your neighbours? To get you arrested at midnight when you're having a party? 100% volume.
It's not the quietest, it's not the loudest, but remember, it's firing front and back, so, you know, if you were measuring all around, it would certainly come out a lot better than if you, as I am doing, just measuring on axis. You remember that when we're talking about in pure loudness terms. But in pure loudness terms, it's not the quietest. It's not a motion boom, but there's certainly enough volume there for, you know, listening outdoors and cutting through background sounds. And it's open and it's airy. It's not terrible. And it's not terrible now because they all drop their bass. Whereas they drop their bass from like 40%. The rest of them are only dropping like above 80%. So it kind of evens the playing field. But even at maximum volume, there's only one speaker here, isn't it? It's the Motion Boom. It goes the loudest, it's got the most bass. But if we're comparing all of them, I think the JBL Charge 5 doesn't go that loud, but it maintains some sort of decent, it's listenable. The problem with a lot of these speakers is they go really, really loud. They do that by becoming a screech fest, dropping almost the bass and the mids, just giving you the highs. Of course, it's easier to go louder. You can measure it as being louder, but what do we mean by louder? A lot of us just want the bass. Well, then it's not loud at all. But in technical terms, when you measure it, that's not particularly loud, but it maintains a balance. The Audio Pro C3 doesn't go as loud technically as the G2, but it's got as much bass without having the high end, so it will sound a bit more, a little bit more pleasing to the ear, while having as much bass as the G2, but technically not going as loud. I have cheated! Adam Ross says he only uses one EQ. I have cheated with the Motion Plus because it's nice all the way through. They push that 150 hertz slider, but there's so much headroom that they're giving you that seems to be even beyond the limiters. It will distort massively, you know, 90, 100% with the 150 hertz slider where I've left it. If you don't listen at these at maximum volume, leave it. But I have reduced it as a special one-off case in this test. Just brought it a little smidgen down to level, which is still a little bit of a push. And then it becomes less of a distortion fest. But it sounds decent enough. It goes loud. It goes loud. It's listenable. And it's only in the deep bass, which you're not going to hear anyway, where the G2 can outmuscle the max sound, the kind of looks like a big Max Sound Plus. The Motion Plus, it's an 80 quid, that's a 300 quid speaker. Where's your money going? Which, you know, at the end of the day, we said the winner, of course, is the Motion Boom. It's got the most bass. It's the only one you can use as a boombox.
Winner.
It just goes loud. It's just got it. It just does it all. And you can use the custom EQ to tailor it how you want. You can reduce the bass, get rid of the bass, but the headroom's there to do what you want. And you will hear instruments doing things on the Motion Boom you won't hear on any of the other speakers because they can't be reduced down to 40 hertz, which you can do on the Motion Boom. And here's some of those, let alone some of the things drums can do, which for me is why I love the Motion Boom, given its price, because the others, you won't hear everything a drum kit is doing. So the takeaway is what I said in the first one. I'm not impressed by the G2. That's an 80 quid speaker. At 80 quid, I'd say, yeah, that's a decent buy. You just won't get any deep bass. And that's the thing. It's all about, you got to review it at the price. What HiFi reviewed it at, I don't know, at a bar late at night, and they got mixed up, maybe with the Motion Boom. They said it's the best sound per pound speaker out there. I think they've nicked my trade line. And they lose a lot of credibility. Well, I don't know what credibility they got with you. I do read what HiFi for some of the Cinema kit, but in terms of speakers, very, very strange. Their opinions on speakers that we know are good or not good. They just never seem to hang with us. Why is that? I don't know. Is it because we don't advertise with them? So, I hope you know where we stand with all these speakers. You've now got a reference on all of these speakers. You can go back, tell your grandparents again, tell your mum, your dad, your brothers, your sisters, where you saw it, where you were, when it happened. 6 speakers, 1 video. Alan Ross Reviews. Hope to see you in another video.
I ain't about that life. I ain't about that life. Ain't no project wife, got my logic right, cause I'm not your type. I ain't about that life. I ain't about that life. Sorry, ma, I ain't get it right. I'ma just live my life. I ain't about that. I ain't about that life.